Let me start by admitting up front. I know I'm a terrible person. I've been with my wife for 18 years, married for 15, and we have a 15-year-old son. In the early years of our marriage, I traveled a lot for work. During one trip home, she got pregnant, so I stayed put for a while to help raise our son. But eventually, I returned to my traveling schedule. I love my wife, but I don't think I've ever truly been in love with her. Over the years, I've become less and less attracted to her. Still, I try to be a loving and caring partner and do what I can to make her happy. Honestly, though, I'm only still here because of our son. Growing up without a father was rough. My dad was completely absent from my life. My parents divorced before I was born. My mother is a lesbian, and my father was never involved. I never met him, and he passed away in 2001, so I never got the chance. That absence shaped me in ways I can't fully articulate, but it left me determined to be there for my son, at least until he's an adult. There's another layer to this. My wife is bisexual. She's always said that if we were to separate, she would exclusively date women. Those comments stir up old, complicated feelings tied to my upbringing. But again, my love for my son is what keeps me here. This, however, isn't the part that makes me an irredeemable piece of shit. Despite my feelings, I never cheated on my wife. Until 2022. That's when everything changed. Mid-year, I went on a multi-month work trip. One of my colleagues, someone I'd been attracted to since I started this job a few years ago, was part of the group. Let's call her Jess. She's married too, to another colleague of ours. Jess has a bit of a reputation. There are plenty of rumors at work that she's not faithful to her husband. For my part, I've always kept my distance, keeping my head down and avoiding after-hours socializing during these trips. But this time, something shifted. From the moment we landed, another coworker, let's call him Mike, was glued to Jess. They spent every spare moment together. Meanwhile, I stayed out of it, keeping my usual routine of quiet nights in my room. One night, around 1 a.m., I couldn't sleep, so I opened TikTok to kill some time. A few minutes in, Jess messaged me. She'd noticed I was online. We started chatting, and the conversation quickly turned playful, flirty, but not outright sexual. At some point, we talked about cuddling. I admitted I missed it. It's not something my wife and I do. It just doesn't happen in our relationship. Jess said she understood, and then surprised me with an invitation to her room. My dumbass accepted. I walked down the hall in my pajama pants and a t-shirt. Jess answered the door wearing something similar. We talked for a bit before crawling into her bed. I was the big spoon. She was the little spoon. Her head rested on my left arm, my right arm wrapped around her waist, my hand on her stomach. The second we settled in, it felt like everything clicked. This felt right, like this was where I was supposed to be. I pulled her closer, and it felt like heaven. Of course, as a typical guy, I got an erection. There was no way she didn't notice, so I tried to shift my hips away to avoid making it awkward. But instead, she pushed back, wedging herself closer, making it impossible to ignore. And that was it. Nothing else happened that night. We lay there, talking for hours as I held her. Eventually, I returned to my room to get ready for the day ahead, and she got up to do the same. The next day, all I could think about was how happy I'd felt holding her in my arms. It was like a drug I was instantly addicted to. Judge me if you want, but at that point, sleeping with her wasn't even on my mind. I didn't know what she wanted or felt. I knew I should have felt guilty. I even questioned myself about it, but I didn't. That evening, a group of coworkers, including Jess and Mike, went out for dinner and drinks. Mike stayed close to Jess the entire time, being overtly flirty with her. After dinner, we headed back to the hotel and hung out by the pool for a while, chatting and having more drinks. Mike was drunk, Jess had a buzz, and a few others were tipsy. I hadn't had a single drink and was getting bored. I excused myself to go back to my room, and Jess also decided to call it a night. Of course, with Mike trailing behind her. Jess's room was 2 doors down from mine. As I passed her room, I said goodnight and went inside. They stayed outside her door talking as I got ready for bed. After a shower, I checked my phone. Nothing. About an hour later, I woke up unable to sleep and started playing on my phone. That's when Jess messaged me, asking if I was still awake. I told her I was, jokingly adding, "Why? Are you looking to cuddle?" To my surprise, she immediately responded, "Yes," and said her door was unlocked. Like a junkie chasing his next fix, I grabbed my pajamas and hurried to her room. The lights were off, and the TV was on when I walked in. Jess was in bed, covered up. Housekeeping had remade the bed, so I had to pull the covers free before climbing in. She was wearing a long, stretchy cotton nightgown this time. We resumed the same position as the night before. Me as the big spoon, her as the little spoon. Just like before, I felt that same sense of belonging, like this was exactly where I needed to be. And, once again, the inevitable happened. I got an erection, she noticed, and instead of pulling away, she pressed back against me. We lay there for hours, talking quietly in the dark. Eventually, she shifted onto her back, still resting on my arm, with my hand on her stomach. She looked up at me and smiled, and I smiled back. Without a word, we leaned in and began to kiss. One thing led to another, and we had sex. I won't turn this into a steamy novel, but I will say it was incredible, probably the best sex I've ever had in my 40-plus years of life. It lasted over an hour. Afterward, we snuggled again, talking quietly until she fell asleep in my arms. This became our routine for the next few weeks. Jess eventually shared that she and her husband have an open marriage, though she only started seeing others after he cheated on her. According to her, he neglects her emotionally and physically and is generally a terrible partner. Jess also mentioned that she dislikes it when feelings get involved in casual hookups, which she made clear from the beginning. For context, before this, the closest I'd come to cheating was kissing another woman once. My wife had her own moment of infidelity when she played with another woman's breasts one night. Over the years, I stopped initiating sex with her, but I never refused her when she asked. Still, my attraction to her had steadily waned over time. Back to Jess. Despite her warning about feelings, I couldn't help but feel like she was filling a void in my life that had been empty for so long. One night, after we finished, I was still lying on top of her, brushing her hair back and looking into her eyes, riding a high from the intimacy. That's when she told me she loved me. It caught me off guard. I needed to know if she was serious, or if it was just post-sex emotions talking. She assured me she was sure. Her words unlocked a flood of emotions I'd been suppressing for weeks. I told her I loved her too, and when we went at it again that night, it felt completely different, deeper, more meaningful. This continued for a few more weeks. During that time, Mike remained glued to Jess whenever we were at work or in group settings, and she didn't seem to discourage it. I chalked it up to her trying to keep our relationship under wraps. One day at work, an item went missing, and the whole team spent over an hour looking for it. I eventually found it in the dumpster, still sealed in a cardboard box with red and white tamper-proof tape. It wasn't a small box either, about 8 by 10 by 16 inches. Only 2 people on our team handle trash. One flattens boxes completely, and the other, Mike, tosses them as is. Since I'm in charge, anything that goes wrong, like throwing away an important part, ultimately falls on me. I couldn't prove Mike did it since I hadn't seen him take out the trash that day, but it fit his pattern. I was sure Mike was the one who threw out the box, but I couldn't prove it. So, I gathered the team to raise my concerns, probably more sternly and angrily than I should have. I didn't point fingers, but there was some backlash from team members. Before I said something I might regret, I left and went back to the hotel. Later that week, after Jess and I had finished our nightly routine and she'd fallen asleep in my arms, I broke a rule. I looked at her phone. I wanted to see if Mike had admitted to throwing out the box because I had to know. What I found was both the answer I was looking for and a lot more than I bargained for. Yes, Mike had admitted to her that he was the one who tossed the box, though it didn't seem intentional, just an accident. But as I scrolled further, I saw messages that made my stomach turn. Jess had been asking Mike if he wanted a blowjob, not just once, but several times, even during the time we'd been involved. I had assumed they might have been somewhat involved on this trip based on how attached he was to her, but since that first night of cuddling, we had been together every night. If anything was happening, it must have been during the day. My stomach churned, and I felt nauseous. As I scrolled further, I came across a picture she'd sent of us holding hands in the car, followed by texts to Mike and others where she was talking trash about me. I felt utterly betrayed. I had to get out of that room before I lost it. I got up, got dressed, and gathered all my belongings from her room as quickly as I could. Back in my own room, I barely made it to the toilet before throwing up. Then I showered, and showered again. I threw up once more, and finally, I broke down crying. This was exactly what I deserved for cheating. I knew I was a piece of shit, but the pain of it still crushed me. I couldn't understand why she would do or say those things after I'd opened up my soul to her. I got ready for work early to avoid any private confrontation. But soon, Jess began calling and texting me repeatedly, which I ignored. I knew now what she really thought of me, and I was done. About 20 minutes before our team usually gathered in the car, Jess showed up. It was clear she'd been crying. She asked me what was going on, and I told her the truth. I went through her phone to see if Mike had admitted to throwing out the box, and in the process, I'd found everything else. She asked how I got into her phone, and I admitted I used her fingerprint. She looked hurt and disappointed and told me as much. Then I asked about the messages I'd found. She claimed she'd only been flirting to throw people off the scent of our relationship. She insisted nothing was going on with Mike and that she loved me. When I looked into her eyes, she seemed sincere, and I believed her. We hugged, I kissed her, and eventually, we fell back into our routine. For the next few nights, we cuddled while watching TV, gradually easing back into intimacy. She even gave me the passcode to her phone, saying all I had to do was ask if I ever wanted to see it. Things felt genuine again. We went on small dates after work, dinner, a movie, shopping. It felt like a real relationship, and I was happier than I'd been in years. I constantly showered her with affection, telling her I loved her and how beautiful she was. We talked about the future and agreed that after our children finished school, we'd be together. When we returned home, we kept the relationship under the radar as best we could. We texted constantly about our lives, kids, work, everything. At work, we sat in her car during breaks and lunch, talking, cuddling, and occasionally having sex. Every few months, we'd take a day off to spend together at her house, completely inseparable. From my perspective, everything seemed great. Then Jess started looking for a new house. The one she lived in belonged to her father, and she wanted to move out, not something that raised suspicion at the time. Eventually, she and her husband found a house and began the process of getting approved and making an offer. That's when things started to change. She became distant. Replies to my texts took longer, or didn't come at all. She told me we couldn't sit in her car as often anymore because people at work were spreading rumors about us. It was odd but not completely unreasonable, given the time of year and her kids' after-school activities. She still said she loved me, still gave me kisses, but that was it. Then I noticed she'd started wearing a wedding band, something she hadn't worn in the 14 months we'd been involved. Every morning, I'd send her a sweet message like, "Good morning, beautiful. I miss you," and she'd usually reply quickly. But even that started to slow down. For about 5 more months, she kept up the routine, but everything slowed down more and more. I was lucky if I got a kiss once a week, and even then, it was brief and lacked any passion. We hadn't been intimate since she was approved for the house. Despite this, she continued to promise that she loved me and wanted me, though her actions said otherwise. One day, we met after work, and she wouldn't even let me get close to her. Deep down, I assumed it was over the day she started wearing the ring, but for months she kept hinting otherwise. Finally, after I returned from a trip, she told me outright that we were through. You can brace yourself for something for months and still not be ready when it happens. I was absolutely crushed. I had to leave work because I couldn't stop myself from breaking down. The moment I was outside, the dam broke, and I spent the rest of the weekend completely miserable. We went no contact for a few weeks. During that time, I felt shattered but kept going day by day. Then, out of nowhere, I got a message from her saying she couldn't stand this and wanted our relationship back. Of course, I said yes. I was still deeply in love with her and didn't want to be without her. We started texting again, sitting in her car during breaks, sharing cuddles, and the occasional kiss. But there was still no passion, and the ring stayed on her finger. This continued for about a month before she ended it again. This time felt definitive. I tried to talk to her, but her replies were generic or cold, as though all feeling had been drained from our conversations. I couldn't understand why she treated me this way. I knew karma was probably the answer. I was a cheater, and I deserved punishment, but that didn't make it hurt any less. I even tried to just be her friend, but she wouldn't engage. Our text conversations lasted only a few minutes, and in person, she could barely look at me. When she did, I felt nothing, not even friendship, from her. I was devastated. It's been 6 months since our final separation, and I wake up every single day still in love with her, still missing her. I think about her constantly, from the moment I open my eyes until the moment I close them again at night. Most nights, I fall asleep with tears in my eyes. I'd say 6 out of 7 days a week, I cry thinking about her. I feel lost. She's all I want in life, and without her, nothing seems to make me happy. I can't find a single thing to distract myself from thinking of her. Everything I used to enjoy feels empty now. I can't even remember the last time I genuinely smiled. My focus is shot. At work, I get by, but outside of it, I can't concentrate on anything. I can't enjoy TV, my phone, or hobbies I used to love. I start projects but lack the drive to finish them. Even driving my car, something that used to bring me so much joy, feels meaningless. It used to be my favorite escape, but now I barely care. I'm not suicidal, but I feel numb to everything and everyone around me. Nobody in my life seems to notice what I'm going through, which I guess is both a blessing and a curse. I just feel stuck, trapped in this loop of sadness and longing. I don't know how to move on or how to let her go. It's been months, and my feelings haven't changed. I've never experienced a breakup like this in my 40-plus years of life. As cliché as it sounds, I felt like she was my soulmate. I've never loved anyone the way I love her, and it's tearing me apart.